Hello dear listeners, TW here. Join me as I traverse 100 years of horror cinema, one flick at a time. Werewolf films have a curious lineage, at least in comparison to their equally beloved cousins, vampires, mummies, Frankenstein flicks, etc. While Dracula and Frankenstein kicked off franchises and genres, they were based on already famed texts. Werewolf pictures have no such origin story. There is no definitive title that evokes a plethora of thought like the names Stoker or Shelley. The most famous werewolf picture of the golden age of Hollywood is, of course, Universal's The Wolfman starring Lon Chaney Jr. This was not based on any text but spawned dozens of sequels and rip-offs throughout Hollywood and beyond. There was, however, one text that comes close to a tome for the creature, 1933's The Werewolf of Paris by Guy Endore. This was the basis of The Curse of the Werewolf 1961. Hammer's foray into horror was going strong and arguably entering its peak since 1957's The Curse of Frankenstein. It seemed only natural that the company would remake the werewolf tale in Technicolor as it had with so many other titles. This was the easy path. However, the rights to remake Universal films directly rather than make new versions based on old text were a bit of a grey area. Therefore, basing this film on the aforementioned novel was prudent. Horror legend Terence Fisher helms this Oliver Reed picture, which adds a certain something to the formula. Lon Chaney's Talbot was a tragic character, but tragedy in a suit. Here we have a generational down and dirty tale. The extended prologue shows the birth of Reed's character, whereby his mother was imprisoned with a beggar for disrespecting her master. She is attacked by this beggar, played admirably by Richard Wadsworth, a small-time player, a dynamic character actor who featured in Hammer films and Hitchcock's. One could be forgiven for thinking that he is the protagonist. The film lingers on him long enough. Then, perhaps it is the poor servant girl thrown into his clutches. However, both expire, and Act 1 concludes with Reed's younger self as a boy, barely containing his animal instincts, having killed some of the local flock. While this extended setup is perhaps overlong and superfluous, as it is not until adult Oliver Reed enters that we get the story proper, the execution by Fisher is so well done and it adds plenty of flavour to the Spanish sets that it is hard to imagine the film without it. Reed, now firmly in the role, leaves his estate to work at a nearby villa. As he falls in love with the daughter of the landowner, his animal instincts return. I wonder if the werewolf is a metaphor for something in man's nature. Upon discovering that bloody corpses have been left in his wake, the distraught Reed must face his animal side in a climactic and dramatic finale that is both reminiscent of the Universal era, but suitably separate to have its own identity. This indeed sums up the whole picture. Why the Spanish sets? Simply put, they were left over from another aborted Hammer production. They add a production value that is rarely seen in Hammer films from that era. However, while this is a plus and Fisher's direction was rarely better, it is Reed who steals the show. Oliver Reed was suitably named a legend of Hollywood. He would not peak for perhaps another decade, but the way in which he dives into the role as both the tragic man and wild beast deserves special praise. So too the werewolf get-up, expertly constructed by Roy Ashton, Hammer's makeup guru. Lon Chaney was the perfect man in 1941, and while it would be a hard call to say Reed does it better, it is perhaps more apt to say that they were both suitably cast and fit their roles to perfection. While Reed had a more varied career and would ultimately leave Chaney's legacy in the dust, his powerhouse sympathetic and physical performance are worth the price of admission alone and elevate a good film to greatness. Perhaps the finale is slightly anticlimactic by today's standards. It is an otherwise flawless picture. It was a hit, but not as successful as the previous Hammer outings, which may explain why no more werewolf pictures were made by the company. But the film is rightly held in high esteem today. Enjoy.